Hello, world. I'm Chris Pirillo, and I am joined by Chris Baker, who was the recipient of a half-hour go-to-meeting with me, courtesy of our sponsor, Citrix. Was that a cow or a car?
On my end, or?
I think it was your end, because I heard something
Oh,
moo.
yes, our office is right next to the street, so yeah,
Fantastic.
might hear a
Okay.
few cars. Sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. If it was a moo, I just had to mitigate and know that it wasn't coming
This is Alabama,
from
so
the
you never
house.
know.
Well, I'm from Iowa, and we're used to cows all over the place, I think.
There you
In
go.
fact, my parents' theme for their kitchen is a Holstein theme with spotty, white and black cows. Okay, so Chris is the recipient of a go-to meeting with me. We're here to really talk about anything. Chris can set the direction of this particular meeting, thanks to, again, Citrix, and I think their logo is somewhere right down, like, I've got a webcam here, and I'm trying to. You see it in a different location than I do, but that works. And he also got a $300 gift card, courtesy of Citrix, for Apple. Anything he wants to buy at Apple, which someone said they cried foul because even though this was completely random, someone said, "Wait a minute, Chris, not me, but this other Chris, used to work for Apple." So and there was no funny business at all. Completely random. You no longer work for Apple. For how long have you not been working for Apple?
About a year and a half.
Okay. I don't know if there's a
So it's been a
statute of limitations or whatever, but it was completely innocent. It was just a gift, completely random gift for you being a really, I would say, if you were paying attention for this particular giveaway, I would consider you in the upper echelon of people paying attention to the type of stuff that we normally do. And so this is, I guess, another gift. My time is the one thing that I can't get back, so thank you for bearing with my technical difficulties today.
Well,
Right
and my
before,
technical difficulties last week,
see,
or
that's
the other day.
the other day we had tried to do a go-to meeting and we had some Wi-Fi issues on Chris's end, and today on my end I had my own little hardware issues. The microphone that's dangling here is broken, so this is the last time people are going to see me using this pair of headphones. But audio should be good. Video is definitely working loud and clear today, and I would say that your background trumps mine. Is that a real background, or is it like one of those fake, backgrounds that you're composited against?
This is a brick wall. Our office, we're a startup company. I work for a company called Motion Mobs here in Birmingham. We're an iPhone and Android app development company, and this is one of the buildings that we work out of. I think it was built in the early 1900s, so all of the paintings you see on here are like very old advertisements from little convenience store kind of things that have been
So I should
in and
ask
out.
you then. You can feel free to ask me a million questions, whatever you have on your mind. But I do want to ask you, since you, at least in your Twitter profile, you talk about being a UX, an engineer, really, and you work for a startup where you're developing software for iOS and Android, the two leading platforms today, at least as far as mobile is concerned. Or maybe even beyond that. The question that I get very regularly is, how do I start? Right, and I have to use a service called Mobile Roadie, which develops an app for iOS and Android, but it's completely on the back end. The app, for what it is great because I can send out push notifications from it, but it sucks because I'm kind of limited in what I can do with the application. So there are
Sure.
benefits of using the platform, but also drawbacks. How does one, or how would you recommend, and you can even take this from your angle of UX, user experience, how does one get started doing what you do?
Well, I'm the user experience designer, so I don't do a whole lot of the coding and back-end stuff. But there's several different ways to get into either one. You can use a product or a software like you're using. You said Mobile Roadie was what it was called? Yeah. You could use something like that to it's a great way to get started and just kind of play around, get your ideas out there. But there are plenty of other, as far as just like gaining the knowledge, there are several, like Mac Pro Videos is a good start. They have everything from design to actual coding. I think lynda.com is another one that does same kind of tutorials and stuff like that. I believe you actually, through deals.lockergnome.com, have also had a few Learn iOS with, tutorial kind of things. So
Some people have used that, and they've been successful in the sense that, when I started with computers and technology, and I've talked about this a million times, so stop me if you've heard this before. Basic
go ahead.
programming. No, it was basic programming on the Commodore 64, and now we have these tutorials, which I suppose I could step through, at some point to program my own thing, but I inevitably know that it would look a lot like Flappy Bird, but in a bad way, in a not ever being able
Not
to take
intentional.
off way. Yeah, like completely unintentionally. Like this looks like it's horrible. So I'm very grateful to be able to see the array of resources from Code Academy all the way through to help people. So you recommend those types of I guess tutorial experiences.
Absolutely. And as far as if you just have like an idea of, I have this app that I want to make kind of thing, the biggest advice that I can give to anyone, and it's something that I've learned with the company I'm with, working with clients on a client basis, is the more you plan for it, the better. You'll never have everything figured out. Everything's going to kind of come, and you'll have to change some things, So the more you plan, the better you are off.
Yeah,
and that goes with design, that goes with functionality, the experience, everything.
Yeah, it's funny. The saying is, those who fail to plan should plan to fail.
Right.
And my planning experiences are much the same. I kind of have a general idea of what I want to do, and then do my best to execute on the idea to try to bring those ideas to fruition.
Sure.
And sometimes the best laid plans, they just never go anywhere. I mean, I may have executed perfectly, exactly the way I wanted to, and ultimately just I missed the mark because I was missing that magic ingredient that I couldn't necessarily compensate for. But you're right. I think planning can go a long way. Here's a question for. Oh no, you go ahead. You were breathing as though you had a question for me. But I'm firing on all cylinders because I'm a huge fan of user experience. So you're a rock star to me.
Another thing I will say past the kind of do-it-yourself method, which would be like the mobile roadies and like learning the code and stuff, is there are shops like us that would do it. Of course, you can do the whole like send it to India kind of thing and just that kind of thing, which you don't always hardly ever get the best experience of. But if you have someone like us who does like custom everything, we have in-house designers, developers, everything is done custom. That's, I would say, is probably the more expensive route, but it's kind of one of those you get what you pay for kind of things. So if you're really wanting to make a product that you're wanting to be proud of and to start like a business off of, that kind of thing, then I would suggest finding not necessarily us, but a very experienced group of developers and designers who have had time to go through trial and error already, so you don't have to waste months or years of your time with trial and error.
That's the thing. Time is the one resource, and I've preached this a million times over. It's the one resource you can't get back. You just can't. Yep. Time is so precious, and that is when, when I see someone coming to me and they want something from me, and they say, well, I'm willing to pay $5. I'm like, well, I know you're willing to pay $5, but my time's worth a little more than $5 for what you're asking for. And you have to pardon, that's not a cow, if you can hear Wicket barking in the background. Hey, baby! I'm trying to call my wife here, not the dog. That's Buddy. No, Wicket.
Either one.
Buddy.
That's fine.
Honey, I'm doing a go-to meeting right now. Can we try to quell Wicket? I can't tell if you laughed or not. I'm having problems hearing anyway with my cold. Maybe she's going to help or not. I think she knew we were going to be doing this. So sorry about the interruption.
No, that's fine.
It's a question of how much is your time worth? How much is that time worth? And to, suddenly, okay, so I'm going to give a scenario. You pay a team or a person $1,000 and you get a product that it's horrible. Or you can pay a team $10,000 and get a product that's absolutely amazing. Which is more expensive? To me, the more expensive would be $1,000, and it's not a matter of dollars. It's a matter of time. The experience, the value. Being there or not being there in the marketplace, and that's why I talk about it with products too. It's like I got into not hot water exactly, but I made the assertion, and I've done this before. But it's not the idea; it's the implementation. And like you can have a great idea, but if you can't implement it in any way that's workable, it's a waste, or it's not anything. There's a million great ideas. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. And if you spend that $1,000 for something that you're not happy with, then you're going to end up probably spending the $10,000 to get something you are happy with. So it just stacks on top of each other. So that's more time wasted, more money wasted.
You can always earn back money. It's exactly right. You can always earn more money. Yep. Always. You may have to work harder for it, but you can always earn more money. You cannot earn more time. Time is everything. The more you wait, to do something, even if it's not working perfectly, the time that you would have spent not doing it is time wasted. It's time you can't get back.
Yeah,
So
and if you have a good product, the opportunity for you to gain that money back, if that's what you're worried about, is a lot greater than if you have a crappy product.
That's right. You know,
So,
it's something that I think you understand, Chris. Something that I certainly understand. You know, doing what I
absolutely.
do, and it's why I don't get very excited when usually when a company announces something, apart from Apple,
Sure.
because I know Apple's nailed the experience. Does that mean that I
Exactly.
think Apple's perfect? Absolutely not. I
Yeah.
hated iOS 7. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is rotten, and they addressed a
Yeah.
lot of the UX. And I would say more UI oversights with iOS 7 with the 7.1
And still
update.
are.
Yeah, and, you know, but they got it out there. They got it out there at a time they needed to. I'm still not sold on it, but it certainly it certainly, you know, showed me that Apple, you know, has a chance of kind of losing that user experience if they're not careful. And I think
Sure.
you know, the Maps debacle, which I thought was overblown, but I live in Seattle and it was never that bad for us.
It wasn't bad here
You know,
either.
Siri, I'm still not thrilled with its implementation. It's
Sure.
more of a gimmick. You know, there's certain things that I think Apple has missed the mark on, but they've done in terms of general industry. I think they have user experience at the central part, or should have it as a central part of the overarching experience, and I think that's key for consumer electronics. That's me.
Oh,
I'm a
absolutely.
UX guy, though, a fan of it.
Oh, I
Can't
totally
implement.
agree. And two, that's the thing too. Like UX, one of the biggest things with it is it's really hard to define.
Right.
Uh, so I mean,
It's very visceral. It's personal.
yeah, and UX actually, as far as UX design, actually has a lot of criticism because it's not, you know, the user experience itself cannot be fully designed and it can't be measured either. So it's kind of hard to. That is strictly on a trial and error basis. So finding someone, going back to building an app, if you're wanting to build an app or anything, a website, any kind of software or product, going with somebody who has experience and have done that, you know, done the A/B testing and have done focus groups and have had clients and client reviews and things like that already, it just gives so much more value to it. Not saying that you couldn't pick it up, learn it, and do it yourself and do a great job, but why not do both? Why not have a great product and learn alongside doing it? You know,
You know,
that's just me.
it's not just you. It isn't. I mean, I feel at some point, and like every day of my life, I sometimes feel like I'm scraping by. And I know that some people in a different position would think, well, what do you mean? You know, you've got this, and this, and like, you don't understand.
Right.
I feel I'm frustrated with my limitations, or the amount of people I know or don't know or can pay or can't pay to be able to
Right.
do what they do well, so that I can do what I do well. And you know, I've had to design web pages, and at one point I did. I actually designed web pages. I sucked at it. It was horrible, right? You know, I
It's all
loved.
relative.
Yeah, I mean, well, it is, but it got the job done, and
Right.
you know, ultimately that's what mattered. But I think design has evolved with user experience to the point where
Absolutely.
it's not just a nice thing, it's the only thing. And that's where I felt
Absolutely.
I've been falling behind so far with my web entities, whether it's my blog or what I've been trying to do with LockerGnome.com. It's like I have to look for things that are out there in the open public for me to download a theme and install the theme to try to make WordPress work without having to wrestle with it on the back end. That's been a completely different nightmare that has luckily been mitigated at this point. You know, to have those experiences for a community, but being limited by my inability to create those user experiences on my own, or have the budget
Right.
to be able to have a better, what I believe would be a potentially better user experience.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll say, probably the main
I apologize.
factors.
Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
For people who are watching, because I know this is going on YouTube, for people on YouTube who are watching who may not understand the difference between UI and UX, I wanted to kind of explain that a little bit. So UI is the user interface. It is how it looks, all the pretty things, all the design that you see, that you visually see, colors, icons, that kind of stuff. And user experience kind of goes along with that, but has a whole lot more kind of backing it up. So the user experience is more about how a person interacts or responds to a system or a software or OS or something like that. And tons of factors go into it. the user's previous experience, whether they've used Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, whatever they're used to. You have to keep in mind the system properties, like what all the device is capable of doing, the different usage situations, like what exactly are you trying to accomplish with your app, how have other people done it, how have they failed, how have they accomplished it, your target market. I mean, so many different things. The list can go on and on. Brand, pricing, people's opinions. I mean, so when we're talking about user experience, there is really the whole, what's the word? Culmination, is that the word I'm looking for? Like everything.
An amalgamation, right?
Yeah, of everything that you are experienced from the time you pick up the device to the time you set it down versus just the design that you look at and think's pretty. Now, the design can affect the way you perceive that user experience. Like when, for example, you said you didn't like iOS 7. When I first saw iOS 7, I hated the icons, and it made it almost unusable with me for like a week.
I still hate it. I still hate the icons.
Yeah, I do too. I'm just getting used to them.
Right.
So that affected our user experience. So they kind of go hand in hand, but user experience is just backed by so much more, and that's one of the main reasons why I was talking about earlier. It's not measurable. There's no way for somebody to sit down and say, okay, I've designed the perfect user experience for anything. Or there would be a lot more rich people in the world right now.
Oh, no doubt. It really, UX, and I do understand the difference between UX and UI, and I know a lot of people do confuse them. I go back to before the iPhone launched, everyone was, agog, like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. And like, I've seen touchscreen phones before, and they suck. Yeah. They're horrible. Yeah. Like, why is Apple gonna, why is this any different? And I've seen them.
I believe that was actually when I first started watching you. It was around the time you did that first iPhone review.
Oh God.
But then I liked how you did the before and after, and you're like, I was wrong.
I was so wrong. I ate so much crow. Well, because my experiences before, but it's true. Right. I had been tainted by horrific experiences. I mean, I may have seen like something that looked good, but it just didn't work well. And that was, I think, the disconnect for the user experience for me. And that I learned a lot of things. One, never talk negative about a product that you've never had a chance to use yourself. Right. To provide context. And two, always be open to a new experience. So
sure.
It was a situation where I picked up the phone, opened up the weather app, and swiped to the left, and because I had only to that point, the only type of touchscreens, and I didn't realize it until that moment, the only type of touchscreens that I had used before were resistive, and this was the first capacitive touchscreen, at least the one that was a capacitive touchscreen that was implemented in such a way that it was an astounding difference. That single swipe in the weather app was it. And I'm like, all right. I was like, oh, I'm gonna eat so much crow, so much crow. So it's always funny when people say, "Oh, you're such an Apple fanboy," but you have no context, dude. No context. Right. Something could look great, but if it doesn't work well, to me, it's not worthless, but it's a huge dent in that user experience that makes me not want to use the product.
Absolutely.
So I got a question then. Well, I guess something that I think you could address better than others. Do you think that understanding, and maybe not being able to implement it every step of the way, but do you think that understanding UX and the value of UX is something that can be learned, or do you think that's innate?
It can, yeah. I mean, that was a big part of my schooling. I went for visual communication, which wasn't in any way like I didn't specialize in UX or user experience or anything like that. But you definitely, there are different theories, and it's actually a lot of psychology that goes into it. A lot of times you'll hear about the Gestalt theory and the Gestalt theology that goes into it. Are you familiar with that?
The Gestalt, like, is that
Gestalt?
the oeuvre, how would you define it?
I don't know what the overall is. I know it's like a psychology behind it, but the one that it applies to design in certain ways, and they actually talk about like proximity, similarity, continuation, closure, and symmetry, I think are the ones. Anyways, it's this whole psychology, which it can go a lot deeper than just design, that you kind of learn. That kind of helps guide that user experience too, because you learn about hierarchy. and several different things that go along with it. So, but I would say the biggest, because before I started here, I'd never even thought about the user experience. I worked at Apple, so I dealt with their devices. I knew that I had good experiences, and I knew that I had bad experiences with their devices and other various devices, but I couldn't necessarily define it myself. So along with just learning just general things about design, for me anyways, for learning just general things about design and the different theories behind that, and then applying it to kind of what I learned by trial and error is kind of how I got my perception of user experience. Okay. If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. This is where I have fallen short with a lot of very narrow-minded geeks in the world who, and I'm not going to put them in one camp necessarily, but it seems to be traditional Windows users, and even to a large degree probably Linux users, beyond that. But let's just take, for example, Windows users. They didn't quite understand my frustrations with Windows 8 and how I would explain that this is a Frankenstein OS. It's schizophrenic. Right. It doesn't know what it wants to be. I was hoping that Microsoft would capitulate and basically address these shortcomings before they actually unleashed Windows 8. I made my father an example of my father, really. Throwing him, face first into the world of Windows 8 with a mouse and a keyboard and no context at all. And that's the way Microsoft was releasing the consumer preview of Windows 8 at the time. So when I talked about a bifurcated user experience, they just didn't seem to understand. Well, fine, you can just skip this screen. I'm like, you don't understand. It's wanting to be this, and it wants to be this at the same time, and it's mixing those experiences, and that's bad. It's the one thing you do not want to mix is a user experience on the same device, the modality of that experience. And I think they were tripped up in the problem that I think you clarified very well earlier of confusing UI with UX. I had really, for Windows 8, I had very few issues with UI. Very few. Sure. Certainly nothing compared to UX. I think with Windows 8.1, Update 1, the one that's going to be released a week from this particular time that we're talking together, it goes further to address some of those UX shortcomings, but only further underscores the points that I was trying to make in the beginning. Like, well, I hate to say it, they might as well have called it the Windows 8 Chris Pirillo Told Us So edition, because this is what they're addressing. I mean, they're still mixing, metaphors, these user experiences together, but at least they're trying to place a Band-Aid over something that's just inherently broken.
Sure. And back to the part where you said, their rebuttal was, well, you can just skip this screen. Well, for someone who's never had that experience before, never used it before, may not know how to skip that screen. So when they spend an hour trying to figure it out, that's already ruined their entire experience of it.
It upsets me. Being someone who, I consider myself a power user, and I love technology for the experiences that it enables. Very rarely is technology a destination, even for me. It's an enabler. And I find myself in a world of other people who love talking about technology for the sake of specs and technology. I'm like, it's not that interesting for me. I always get frustrated when someone blames the user. That's the one thing that to me is just an excuse. It's like you're basically saying your product sucks, or the product that you're defending sucks if you have to work around it in this way, this way, and this way. Okay, so for a practical example, let's take a sideways leap. Emoji, this unicorn. It's a unicorn character set. I don't know if there's unicorn emoji. It would be awesome. Unicode character set, and it really gained popularity with iOS when there was support for the Japanese emoji keyboard that you had to actually not hack, but you had to unlock at some point in iOS. Right. Now it's more of a native functionality, or closer to native functionality. It just exploded, right? The idea of emoji. Well, then you had other people who didn't have support for emoji natively. Certainly Windows users, Linux users. Well, today, instead of Twitter, I don't know if you caught this, but instead of Twitter showing boxes on the web of emoji, if you keyed it in on at this point, like most likely an iOS device, now if you go to a Twitter web page for a tweet and they used emoji, the emoji shows up natively. So they're actually doing some processing. So now Twitter supports emoji. Twitter on the web. And of course, Twitter on iOS, it's inherently baked into the system. Android, the support's kind of half in, half out. But the idea is that Twitter, instead of watering down that user experience is solving the problem by encoding those emoji characters properly, the way they should.
Absolutely.
So finally, on Google Chrome on OS 10, even though this has been a bug for years, I mean, Firefox supports it, but Chrome does not inherently support emoji the way it should. And this has been, I've been watching this bug carefully because this little box, horrible user experience. Twitter's fixed it. They've now addressed it. So now on the web, they're not blaming the user. They're not making the user go, "What's going on with the boxes? Why what's I don't understand the box thing." They solve the problem. They're not blaming the user. They're not saying the user, "Well, you just need to install X, Y, and Z, or you just need to do it this way." They just make it work. It's magical. And to me, that's a good user experience. That's UX. It's magic. It's magic.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll do it subconsciously. They'll make the user feel at fault by putting that box. Because, like, say if they hadn't have updated it and they put the box there, well, the user will think after they use it, "Oh, well, I'm not supposed to use that because it's not showing up," and that'll actually discourage them from using it. Obviously, emoji is a very small thing in the world of everything, but when you're talking about yeah, absolutely. But when you're talking about the user experience, I mean, you have to take every single little detail into account because one little thing may affect one person more than it does the next. Because, like, in Japan, or I think it's Japan, wherever emoji
Japan
started, it was like a big way that they communicated was with emojis. So if they wanted to use Twitter and couldn't use emojis on Twitter, then that would probably, not only would Twitter probably lose users from that target market, but, it would cause some frustration, to say the least.
And that's exactly the frustration. Removing frustration. Yep. It's like sales. Sales is all about removing frustration and objection. And, by making this move, it's a small move. And we were talking about emoji. It's something fun. I love emoji. I was a big fan of making rebuses when I was a kid, where that's, you're typing along, you say, "I picked up the phone," but instead of spelling out the word phone, you use a little phone icon. I love rebuses. So I always kind of liked emoji, but I was limited in terms of where and when I could use it. Certainly on an iOS device using iMessage, I could use it. But I probably wouldn't be using it in, say, a Skype chat or even, to a certain degree, Facebook. And Facebook's kind of half in, half out on emoji support as well. But to see that come from Twitter, it just speaks to improving the user experience, and that's something that's very small, but it adds up. And that to me, you talked about it, the coming together of all these elements. It's the amalgamation of a good user experience, and to see those things happen in I guess these environments that are now, I guess Twitter's a part of my life in the sense that I use it to get access to information and
that's how I want a gift card and Skype with you, so or a GoToMeeting with you.
Pretty much, that's right. You did tweet. You were able to use the hashtag effectively. You knew how to spell my last name.
I know, right?
It's a challenge. I know. No one ever knows how to spell my name. I'm like, really? Like,
the only thing I ever have problems with is remembering if there's 2 R's or 2 L's. But once I figure that out,
you're not alone. Well, we've actually there's a Chris Pirillo spelled P-A, and there's a Chris Pirillo that's P-E, and we've actually had Twitter chats back and forth, and we're forming the Chris Pirillo Club. We just don't know how to spell it really.
That's funny.
But yeah, we follow each other on Twitter. It's like, hey, why not? Because they get confused as me all the time.
Yeah, so you can pass on tweets to each other that.
Yeah, like you tweeted the wrong Chris Pirillo. I'm like, it's okay, it happens. Yeah. It happens. So
we
is
digress.
There really... What's that? Sorry.
I said we digress.
No, I don't think we really had a specific point. I just wanted to talk a bit about UX. I don't often have the opportunity to talk about my perspectives and certainly talk to someone who is in the realm. If this is part of your career, you're a professional, and if UX is in your title, that's about as good as it gets. Is there anything else that you'd want to say? I guess in this GoToMeeting, any questions for me? Because I've dominated the conversation by making it about UX, but I'm pretty interested in it. So
I love geeking out, period. So it's still a cool thing.
And I think that's what you wanted the GoToMeeting to be about, talking about UX. So
exactly. So we accomplished that.
Yes, it was a good user experience.
Yeah, 2 things. One, my kind of last overall overview of UX, and then one question for you to kind of just a fun little thing. the biggest problem that I think UX is trying to solve, and I'm probably missing things, but this is just kind of my opinion, is two simple things. Well, I say simple. Two simple things is making the product or software, easy as easy as possible to use and natural to the user, and then making the user feel in control of the software and not the other way around. So if there's any two things that somebody wants to know about user experience, that's pretty much what I would sum it up as.
That's powerful. Yeah. I like that. I like that, making the user feel like they're in control, which has been, I think, to the frustration of geeks, who used to be in control of the information of how to do this, and this.
Yeah.
Technology shouldn't work that way. Technology, to me, technology that requires a manual is broken.
Yep.
That's
I
me.
agree.
That's just me. From a consumer's point of view.
Sure.
Not
absolutely.
from an engineering point of view. Obviously, it's not everything can be intuitive, but in terms of a consumer experience or a user experience, UX, I think it's absolutely crucial.
I agree. And on that same note, one of the things that I try to do as I'm making an app, because you'll notice a lot of apps when you download it, it'll kind of walk you through steps the first time. It'll say, oh, to do this, click here. To do this, I avoid that. I've never put that in an application because it bugs the crap out of me.
Really?
Because it's kind of the same mentality. It's like if I have to explain it, it's not easy enough to use.
Yep.
Yeah.
I with games, I appreciate not having to step through that. I like going through and figuring things out, and then it explains, like, kind of hand-holding along the way until you figured it out, and there's a right way to do it in a way that's not quite as optimized as the right way.
Right. But and then the last thing I had a question for you is which is actually part of my tweet. How do you see us in the future, 5 years from now, 30 years from now, interacting with our device? Do you still think it's going to be, I'll leave it up to three things. Do you think it's going to be more touch? Do you think it's going to be visually? Or do you think it's going to be audibly? Or do you think all of the culmination of all of them?
Yeah, I honestly think, as much as Google Glass is a bit out there and people don't understand, what it is and why it exists, I think that's closer to where it's going to be. I think we're gonna, and maybe I'm biased. I wear glasses. I've been wearing this is technology I've been using ever since before I could spell the word.
Third grade.
Yeah, no, but
grade.
This is like kindergarten, preschool. So I've been wearing prescription lenses forever. So to have the power of being connected, being present, built into this device that I wear on my face, I think that can certainly be controlled 7 ways from Sunday. Sometimes it's more intuitive for me to say, oh, set an appointment with Diana to go to the grocery store at 6 p.m.
Right.
Okay, it's done. I don't have to worry about going to, I think this device here, and I'm holding on, this is the Nexus 5 here, or this, the iPhone. These are, they work for now, but I think the days of these devices are very, very limited.
I agree.
Very, very limited. And, I know that's hard to believe for someone who might love smartphones and put their whole life, or if their whole life revolves around a product, I always feel bad for them. Although I say that being surrounded by Darth Vaders. But my life doesn't revolve around Darth Vader's. Darth Vader's revolve around me. Right, just the office. I keep it home. Although that's Star Wars is starting to spread into other rooms now too. So
and baby clothes and everything else.
It's everywhere. Even though this is as an arachnophobe wearing my Venom hoodie here. I think technology, as it continues to evolve, will become increasingly pervasive, and we're still at the stage where it's invasive. And so take, for example, the idea of having to, there was an announcement that's come out, like basically a likely product shot of the next USB cable Type-C is what they're calling it.
Oh yeah, I saw that today. Yeah.
So, I love Apple's Lightning connector, not because Apple makes it. I don't care who makes it. If Google made it, I'd love it just as much because it's reversible. And that's the only reason I love the Lightning connector. And it's small, but it's primarily reversible. Well, the next, the Type-C USB 3. The USB 3. I think it's a 3.1 spec, 10 gigabits per second, twice as fast as the USB 3 spec, reversible cable. It's a great user experience, but it's still invasive. The Lightning cable is still invasive. The idea of inductive charging is, even that in and of itself is invasive. And there's actually and this is a company, it's not a technology, it's a company called Witricity that is basically developing technology to make to harness these electrical waves around us that already exist. There's these magnetic fields around us to harness that and to make the idea of a battery obsolete. I mean, it's just, the idea is just obsolete. Or to have that type of electricity accessible to us wherever we went. At one point, and I think, and this may be a bit liberal, but 50 years from now, I think, and I would hope that's a liberal number. 50 years from now, assuming we haven't killed each other on the planet or killed the planet in the process, the idea of a cable is outmoded. The idea of gasoline, outmoded. The idea of batteries, outmoded. I think we're getting there. And, to be able to explain, if I had to explain to my third grader self what this was, I don't know if I could do it. This is a book. This is a TV. This is everything. A phone. This is everything. I couldn't do it. Or to even explain the idea of Wi-Fi. You turn on a device and it's just there. You assume it's there. We'll get there with electricity. We'll get there with information. And it'll leap from the idea of having this little gadget on our face. And I think it's a good mode to go with for those who can see. Mm-hmm. Certainly controlling something by way of audio is great for those who can't see but still want to interact with the world. Technology to improve lives will become increasingly pervasive to the point where I think we'll go from this as a modality for interaction to a singularity. And I do think it is a distinct possibility of a cyborg future where you could swallow a piece of technology and suddenly now, much like the Matrix, where teach me everything you know about which by the way was 15 years ago. The Matrix. I need to know what was it?
We're
everything
so
about
old already.
I know. Tell me about. Don't get me started at how old the Matrix is, or that I saw it in the theaters and remember it as an adult. Teach me everything you know about this helicopter. I think it was an Apache or something like that. Everything you know, and then okay, I know everything. And I think that's going to happen. I really do. And whether it happens through some kind of analog transmission or just through a processing, all the brain is just a series of neurons that are firing and electrical impulses, and we can figure this out. And at the point where we can suddenly take everything that we might know is from a human collective knowledge and just implant it in our brain, we are suddenly merging with this world of technology. Yeah. So I think that 10 years down the line, I think products like Google Glass are going to be the norm. I think the glasses experience is about as perfect as an experience as could be, whether you need prescription lenses or not, because you've got audible, it's visual, it's interactive. You could use gestures, and it could pick those things up. So as a stopgap, but I think that'll eventually become almost a part of our cortex. Our visual cortex, where we can interact just by a thought. And we've seen bits and pieces of this happening already, thinking our way through an experience. I think that's probably 100 years, 200 years down the road, but I think that is that option is rapidly approaching. Did that answer your question, or did I just babble?
No, well, both.
Okay.
So it's all good.
Okay.
Thinking about what you said, with it being glasses and being very pervasive, kind of just all around us, we're kind of involved in the technology more than with the technology, I guess. Mm. I don't know if my generation is, but the millennial generation is kind of known as being disconnected for always being glued to their phone, never paying attention. Do you think that that's going to make it worse or better?
Better.
Yeah.
This generation always thinks the next generation's, better off and worse off at the same time. Well, in my day, we used to, go outside. Well, no, in my day, we used to have to find a payphone to call our mom to tell her, we needed picked up from the mall. Right. Where we only went because we were hoping to find products that we didn't know existed in the stores, or if there was inventory. I mean, right. And even, rewind further, even before the invention of the telephone. I mean, so there's always... Sure. Technology evolves our way of interacting with the world. There's no better way. There's no worse way. But I think a digital native is going to have a different perspective on what works, but what could work better, more so than someone who's been steeped in dogma and processes that they just cannot escape. You know, I think that's an extreme limitation that just can't be taught out of. I mean, you can't learn yourself out of. Does this sound anywhere near cogent?
It makes sense in my mind.
Okay,
so
good. As long as it makes sense to you, that's all that matters. You know, we find ourselves just locked in the trap of this is the way it is, and this is the way it's always going to be, and this is the way it works, and it only works this way, and any other way is just unintuitive. And once you can eschew, or not even need to eschew, the shackles of what works today, I think that you've got a lot more freedom to explore what works tomorrow.
Yeah. And do you feel the same way about socially, like how we interact with each other, about kind of getting the technology out of our hands? And
so I think right now technology has leapfrogged our ability to use technology. In the sense that, I mean, I'll go back to
the moderation kind of thing.
Hey, it's kind of like I've said, Twitter's a great place to tell the world what you're thinking before you've had a chance to think about it. Technology can't stop you from being a dick. And you know, you've got to be responsible for the things that you're doing. You can't just say, well, it's there and there's a comment form and I'm going to use it and I don't care what anybody thinks, the world revolves around me. And without that social responsibility, I think technology does more harm than it does good. So unfortunately, we're in this stage where we have not been able to, even as adults, as children, or as adults trying to teach children social responsibility for themselves. And this is why you end up with issues of whether you call it trolling. I mean, there's some people who just want to see the world burn. You know, when you lack a personal responsibility and you use technology to get your rocks off without realizing that you're bringing harm to somebody else directly or indirectly, you know, it's that social responsibility that I think technology cannot solve that problem. And I don't think we've yet figured out as society, as a general society, how to adjust and compensate for some people's complete lack of respect for the technology that they're using to destroy. And so I think technology is actually far beyond where it should be in relation to our ability to cope with it at a fundamentally human level, that social level. So that
reminds me of a quote. Reminds me of a quote. I can't remember who said it, but they were saying, you know, this or just technology in general is meant to be a tool, not a pedestal.
Yeah.
And that's kind of.
That's fair. I mean, that's absolutely fair. You know, I think that's where, you know, a lot of kids these days, hell, you know, I've met kids that are more mature than adults. It's not, age is a number. You know, what you do with your time is everything. And it just boils down to me, it always boils down to a personal responsibility, not just do unto others as you would have done to yourself. It's a personal responsibility of saying something, putting your name behind it, and taking a stand. If you're going to say something, there are certain times to put your name behind it, right? If you're making a personal attack, if your name's not behind it, that personal attack is worthless. And I take that approach. Now, let me also clarify, I think anonymity is also very important. So there's a time for it and there's not a time for it. Anonymity, I think, is insanely important. I think it's insanely disruptive, and I think there's absolutely a time and a place for anonymity. But I also believe there's a time and a place for putting your name behind something. So it's not to me, it's not black or white. It's very gray, and all this gray matter in the middle. It just depends. I think some people use anonymity because they're cowards, and I think some people use anonymity because they're heroes. And you know what they are, you know, it's completely contingent on context. And you know, without context, you can't just say that it's this way and in this way alone. You know, when someone comes out and attacks me, it's usually an ad hominem attack, and they have nothing to back it up with, right? They say, you never comment to YouTube videos. I'm like, well, 5 minutes ago, you're wrong, but it's not, the onus is not on me to prove a negative. I can't prove a negative, right? You're wrong. What else do you want? You're wrong. Take responsibility for the thing that you said and say, you know, basically correct it. You made an error and you called my character into question. It's not up to me. Some people think Apple sends me products. I'm like, Well, if they did, I missed that because my credit card statements beg to differ.
Right.
It's not.
I was about to
It's
say,
not
Apple
to
doesn't
me.
really send people
They don't.
products. That just doesn't
But
happen.
the thing is, people will assume, and I'm like, whoa, time out, time out. Unless you can prove otherwise, the onus is on you to prove your statement, and people won't do that. They just throw it out there as like an idea, like whatever's on their mind, blah blah blah. They just barf all over the keyboard, and whatever happens, happens. They don't care. There's a
It's
lack
kinda like
of personal responsibility, lack of respect, even.
Yeah, and that's kind of become the way to fish for truth is
Right.
to say say something that you don't know if it's true or false, and just see what reply you get.
But you say it as if it is a truth. I'm like, well,
Right.
it's not up to me to prove that you're wrong. It's up to you to prove that you're right. I mean, you can
Right.
make an assertion, but unless you have the ability to back it, and the technology's there for them to make the comment. But just because there's a comment form does not give them the God-given right to be a. You have the right to speak your mind, right? But you also understand that you are potentially infringing on somebody else's right to just be left alone. If I have not upset at least one person in this video, I have not done my job.
Well, hopefully we've upset a couple.
Yes. Because some people just don't care about user experience, and those are the people that I'm very grateful are not leading product launches. Most of them, at least.
Yes.
UX to me is not a footnote. It's absolutely central to a good experience. If you eschew user experience, you eschew everything, including your own potential viability in the future. And I will not shed a tear for any poorly written, poorly designed, poor experience software that I've ever had the displeasure of using. I just don't. I'm like, don't look at me. Not my fault. Not my problem. Should have listened. User experience is everything. This worked out well, I would say. So thank you for joining me, and I appreciate that Citrix gave us this opportunity to have a discussion that I think is very, very valuable. Wherever it went, I was happy to have spent my time this way.